I'd like to call to order the study session for the city of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for February 7th, 2022. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, and to join this meeting, you can do it at either on channel 8, you can listen to this, you can join on YouTube at the city's website, and you can make comments at wheatridgespeaks.org. But anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Our agenda tonight is item number 1 is disorderly house ordinance. And item number 2 will be street racing. And after that, we will have staff reports and then any elected officials reports that we're going to receive. As is typical for our meetings, we will start first with public comment. We ask the public to join us and speak on any matter that is on the agenda. So this would be speaking on item number 1, disorderly house ordinance, or item number 2, street racing. Since we're conducting this as a virtual basis, if you would please raise your hand in the Zoom virtual format, and that's located at the bottom of your screen. I think there's a little icon that says raise hand, and if you raise your hand, we will bring you into the meeting. And I believe if you are on the telephone and hit *9, that will unmute you and allow us to bring you into the meeting. So if you'll sort of in one of those two ways make your presence known, we're happy to have you and appreciate your comments and speaking to us. So with that, Mr. Goff, our manager, is handling the technical duties. So I'll go and see if we have anyone with their hand up that would like to speak at tonight's meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I do not see anybody at the moment.
Okay, I'll give it a couple of seconds here, and just for the record, I'd like to welcome the following council members to our meeting: Ohm, Weaver. Let's see, I've got Holteen, Hutchinson, Dozeman, and our city clerk, Mr. Kirkpatrick, is here, and Mr. Stites with District 3, thank you for the wave. I appreciate that. I was looking to see who I might not have gotten. So thank you all for joining us. And we have Ms. Noslerbeck with us from District 4. So we have our only, Ms. Hoppy was not able to make it tonight. So I think we have everybody else. Thank you very much. So if we have no members of the public that want to speak tonight, we will go to our first agenda item, that is disorderly house ordinance. And I will go to our city manager, Mr. Goff, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have Chief Murtha here this evening, and he's got several members of his staff for both items on tonight's agenda. And then I believe Mr. Murtha does have a few other updates concerning police department activities. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Murtha.
Thank you, Chief, for being with us. And thank you to your Chief Lorenz and Commander Pickett for being here also. So Chief, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. We come before you tonight to look for some direction around a couple of issues that we think in the police department we could do better on if we had a little more teeth in some of the ordinances that we either currently have or that we would like to see proposed. Tonight, Commander Pickett is going to talk to you about both of these issues on the agenda, and I believe Ms. Beery is going to follow that up with some comment and research on the direction. These are issues that were identified throughout the course of last year. Just really briefly, I don't want to steal Commander Pickett's introduction, but last year we had several houses of note that were brought to our attention, and we really found ourselves lacking in tools to deal with something that seemed very, at its face, very, very problematic for the community that surrounded them. One of them was on Balsam Street, and it really took a Herculean effort by all city to kind of get that one under control. With respect to street racing, we could talk about that later, but we have seen these large gatherings in our community and communities around us that tend to devolve into street speed contests, and we really want to get ahead of that one with something that is meaningful to that sort of that car community. So Commander Pickett will talk to you about that as well. That being said, I'll turn it over to Commander Pickett for his presentation tonight. Thank you.
Commander Pickett.
Good evening. So the first item on the agenda is the disorderly house ordinance. Kind of a history on this. Throughout the history here at Wheat Ridge, we'll get a residence, whether it's a house or an apartment, where we have people that either own or rent that cause a great deal of issues for the surrounding neighborhood, bringing down the quality of life for the neighborhood. Typically, we don't have a lot of teeth in our ordinance to allow us to do much on that. The chief mentioned Balsam Street. A lot of you may be familiar with Balsam Street, where we had a great deal of calls for service, everything from drug calls to drunken, disorderly people, gunfire, code problems, ran the gamut. The problem was that one set of tenants would do this, they'd move out, another set would come in, start the whole cycle again, causing issues for the neighborhood. So we could address some of the issues on a individual basis, but it wasn't solving the problem. We were finally lucky in the way we were able to handle it, and we were able to get compliance from the owner to do an inspection of the house with the building inspector. Well, once it came time to do the inspection, he told us he didn't have keys to the house, we couldn't get in. But the building inspector did see a problem with the electrical panel on the outside of the house, at which point we were able to condemn the house. People moved out. We were able to start working with the landlord, who, as of yet, has not complied with us. The house is still empty. He still is doing many things against city code, but we're really not able to get a foot in the door on a lot of these situations. On this one, we were able to at least get rid of any of the renters since about May. So we talked to Ms. Beery, and they came up with some ideas on how we might be able to make this a little bit better for us to enforce and come to a conclusion a lot quicker than we were able to in this matter.
Should we, John, you want to turn over to Carmen at this point? And I'm
Certainly.
sorry, I should have introduced her, Carmen. I'm not sure if Carmen, you met the whole new council. Scott's our newest, I guess, Mr. Ohm, but Carmen Beery's with Jerry Dahl's office, and she, as the chief and John mentioned, has been working with us on these two agenda items this evening. Carmen?
Thank you, Patrick. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will just piggyback on what Commander Pickett introed for you all and briefly address sort of the bottom line results of our legal research here in our office before I direct you to the choices that I think you have to make this evening and that we would like as staff your input on, Council. So Commander Pickett laid out kind of the real world experience that has led to the PD's desire to ask you tonight about this, both these issues, but this one first being the disorderly house code section that exists. And I will, again, briefly sort of let you know what we did here as a result of the chief and commander's inquiry to our office in terms of what can we do to potentially strengthen existing code section 15-26. That's the existing disorderly house ordinance. And Mayor and Council, that code section right now is about 3 sentences long, and it essentially says the keeping of any dwelling, boarding house, rooming house, or other residential property in violation of any provision of this chapter, which is the nuisance chapter, or of chapter 26, which is our land use or zoning chapter, as you know, including occupancy limitations. Any residential property that violates our nuisance code, chapter 15, or our zoning code is a nuisance and a disorderly house, and therefore can be abated in the way that any other nuisance is abated under Chapter 15. It also further defined a disorderly house as one that generates law enforcement calls disproportionate to other properties in the neighborhood, or which negatively affects neighboring properties and or residents, whether by noise or maintenance or noxious and offensive behavior that's injurious to the public health, safety, and welfare. Okay, so under the existing code section, to initiate a nuisance abatement process under Chapter 15, the Commander Pickett and his folks and our good patrol officers out there have to essentially either find a nuisance violation, a violation of the zoning code, or use this sort of nebulous, offensive, obnoxious behavior kind of a language to initiate abatement proceedings. That, as Commander Pickett has outlined, has led to some difficulty in queuing things up, certainly quickly, and sometimes the definitional challenges are there for offices. Well, at what point does something come disproportionate? How many calls are disproportionate to the area? What kind of behavior truly rises to the level of obnoxious, right? So we looked at the existing code section and what other potentially jurisdictions across the country are doing in Colorado, and have discovered that in particularly over the last couple of decades, 15 to 20 years, our research revealed that more and more communities are dealing with this very problem by what are known as chronic nuisance ordinances. You see that in the memo that I supplemented Commander Pickett's memo with our legal memo. And those kind of chronic nuisance ordinances, CNOs, because everything must have an acronym. Those CNOs have proven effective in other communities, I think, by more definitively defining what a chronic nuisance property is, right? Whether that's listing particular crimes that may lead to a finding of chronic nuisance, or by setting a certain number, a threshold of calls that are disproportionate, right? So that it's not so nebulous. And we have discovered that these kinds of CNOs or chronic nuisance ordinances have led to more effective enforcement, again, because they are more definitive. So they not only give our officers a little more direction, but they effectively put the public on notice, right? What is prohibited, which is important to our office, right? Legally. And our research has revealed that those kinds of ordinances have proven out to be constitutional if, as I outlined in my memo, certain elements are present in the ordinance. And bottom line, Mayor and Council, adequate notice is one of those important elements that we would include in such an ordinance if you would like to see one. Containment of unbridled discretion, as I mentioned, so the more sort of definitional certainty, the better. That's an important element for constitutional considerations. And finally, the third issue we've identified on the very last page of my memo to you is ensuring that a draft ordinance, if you would like to see one, does not discourage legitimate calls for service, right? The point of these CNOs and these ordinances, and I think the policy goal for governing bodies like you, is not to discourage folks who need to call for law enforcement to call, not at all. Rather, it is to address the sorts of properties that Commander Pickett described, where there are just a lot of calls for service that are really being generated from outside, that are complaints, sometimes from inside too, let's be fair. But we think that we can effectively deal with that policy consideration, as I outlined in my memo, by having some findings in the ordinance to that end, that the goal, the legislative intent, is not to frustrate legitimate calls, but rather to deal with nuisance properties, as well as to educate, right, our folks when we roll out such an ordinance about maybe how to flag or when not to flag as a chronic nuisance property based on the kind of call, right? Officer discretion is always key in any law enforcement context. So Mayor and Council, those are the very basic kinds of legal issues that we looked at and I think have come to a place where we're comfortable supporting the PD's request to pursue an ordinance like that, a CNO ordinance. Ultimately, we recognize that is your decision whether or not to pursue such an ordinance. On the very last page of the memo from me to you, I identify what I think are certain options that you have, no surprise, 3 of them. And one is to authorize our office to work in concert with the PD to prepare an ordinance along the lines that we have researched and we see in a lot of other jurisdictions, a CNO ordinance, a chronic nuisance ordinance, that basically pumps up and gives more muscle and is a little bigger animal than the existing code section 1526. That is one option. Second option we've identified is if you don't want to necessarily have that level of additional language in the code, you could set us to work on pumping up existing code section 1526. We could put some more definite guardrails and guidelines in existing code that might also assist towards the end of giving this thing a little more teeth. Of course, the other option, which is not what the PD is asking for, but an option for you, is to leave existing code as is and maybe engage in some more community outreach efforts or other kinds of efforts to address the problem. Clearly, again, that's not what the PD's here asking you for, but it remains an option to you, Mayor and Council. So those, I think, are the 3 major avenues that I've identified in the last page of my memo to you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the law or anything else or your options, Mayor and Council.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Berry and Commander Pickett for that presentation. We will open this up for questions or comments from council. So let's get the discussion going. Councilwoman Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor Starker, and thank you for the helpful memo and presentation on this. I've got a handful of questions, and I think one of the first things I want to ask is, I know there's at least 2 properties in District 2 that one of the things that has made them a nuisance problem property is ongoing, like, illicit drug behavior that I think is a little bit difficult sometimes for the police department to, not necessarily difficult, but for them to sufficiently identify it as, you know, a home where there's, you know, illicit drug behavior happening. It takes monitoring and a little bit more sort of protocol and in-depth policing to actually, you know, identify that as the problem. So how is that handled if we were to do like a pursuing one of the nuisance ordinances? Like how is a longer term police activity tracking impacted, since it's really like one thing over a long period of time that requires a lot of like police coordination and resources, as opposed to neighbors fighting and smashing and being annoying and being called all the time? Like, how would that kind of weigh into that particular approach?
That may be in terms of, great question, in terms of the record keeping, the tracking, I might defer to Commander Pickett or those who are more knowledgeable on how those things might get tracked in the PD. But Counselor, I think your question is a good one in that it highlights that kind of activity that you just described, right? Maybe illicit drug use that's chronic in and around a property would not be captured by existing code section, by the 3rd option that we've identified, by leaving 1526 as it is, because that is now designed to address, again, nuisance issues and zoning issues, and maybe not our general offense sorts of issues. So in terms of how an ordinance might address and capture what you're describing, I think new code language would be required to address that. And it would be code language that further defines chronic nuisance behavior and qualifying, right, chronic nuisance behavior as including what you described. I think you've hit on kind of a hole in what is currently there. As far as the logistics on how that would be, tracked in our record keeping system, I'm not sure. Commander Pickett, can you speak to that, or Chief?
I just a couple comments on that. Number one, a drug operation is not exclusive or not outside of a disorderly house. There may be two angles to attack a situation like that where you have ongoing drug dealing. One of them, if we were to fashion this law in such a way, could be through disorderly house, and another could obviously be through direct arrest. Right now, if you have observations and you make an arrest, it doesn't really in and of itself lend to disorderly house. But if we can work the language, I think the goal of disorderly house is to disrupt that house or to eliminate it from the neighborhood, which you wouldn't get if you just arrested people constantly for potentially for drug dealing. You might, but we've found some holes in this current ordinance that give us pause to think that we might not be able to overcome that and get a disorderly house. So you may have continuing drug operations in a house, and it may not be categorized as a disorderly house. I don't know, Jim, do you have more on that?
No, I think you recognize it pretty well. I think that's the difficulty that we get into, and that's kind of the difficulty where we've been in the past that Commander Pickett was talking about.
Yeah, so we want to be able to have multiple tools to address issues like that. I've gotten a lot of complaints from different areas. Some of them come from counselors who have houses of this type in their district, and they want to know, what can be done about it. This is one of those tools that I think can really be used to address what we all recognize is a residence or people living in a residence that doesn't live up to the values of Wheat Ridge. And that's really the goal here, is to make sure that people are on notice that they have to maintain a lifestyle that's consistent with the values of Wheat Ridge. So, obviously drug dealing in and of itself would be something that would be a long-term operation. And in the past, we can tend to lose track. The departmental memory doesn't exist easily anywhere. You have to go back and research it. Now we do keep, lately in the last year, we've kept a record of our top 5 offenders by call. So we know that if I go back to using our example on Balsam, had we done this 2-3 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess, when the problem started, it would have come up on our radar, and we would have been able to put more attention on it. We may possibly have made a disorderly house case given the current, the current ordinance. However, we really just kept taking calls, and there was nobody there collecting the data. Now, at least we keep the top 5, and we know if there's a home residence in Wheat Ridge that is really causing the neighbors a lot of angst. So we do that, but over time, and with different shifts and different supervisors, there was never a good way to capture many different things happening at one address unless you specifically looked into it. We're trying to make even more improvements on that, but you're right. Long-term drug investigation might not get to the heart of what we're trying to do. That's why a more nimble, disorderly, with more definition to it and substance to it could probably get us to the conclusion we're going to reach down the road anyway, with less frustration for the neighbors.
Great, thank you for that. So before I ask my next question, I just want to say I'm very much in favor of pursuing a chronic nuisance ordinance. I think it's a way that we can really tailor what's going to work for our community and give more tools for our police department. I am a little bit concerned about how the police department would go about making distinctions between we've recently approved short-term rentals. We have a lot of neighbors who are concerned about our group home living situations. How would an ordinance like this work with neighbors who are just agitated over a permitted use that is perfectly allowable, but they don't like it, and so they're gonna try and make it look like it's a problem property?
Yeah, I'll let Carmen comment on that, but we had the same conversation around our hotel motel licensing and the reduction of calls for service. We're certainly sensitive to it. When Carmen was talking about the idea that we don't want to discourage, people from calling in and reporting an issue, that's certainly part of it. But we also don't want to encourage people to just call because they know that's the way to get rid of somebody they don't like next door. So I think we have to strike a balance in there, and I'll defer to Carmen to talk about how we might do that.
Yeah, and that's precisely right what we raised sort of on the last page of our memo, which is, look, I think the language needs to be crafted, and it would be our job to work on that again articulates that it's not just volume of calls, right? We, as you've identified, can't simply rely on, I think, a numerical sweet spot for that. While that is helpful, again, in terms of offering an idea of where a minimum number of calls may trigger a review or something like that, it cannot be just that. As with every ordinance, again, that we write and craft and then rely on our men and women who are out there enforcing it. We rely on those men and women out there enforcing it to gauge what's going on and exercise their discretion appropriately. So I think, to your question, Councilor Holton, we would not only craft language that articulates council's intent, right? Again, which underscores that it's not to punish legitimate calls for service or discourage legitimate calls for service, nor is it to be a tool for neighboring disputes, but rather a tool for truly getting at chronic nuisance behavior. We would craft language like that, and again have some training and rely on the great men and women who are out there enforcing the laws to identify the dynamics of what's going on, right? That's true for every ordinance that we have. So good language and training is what we would rely on.
Great.
I would just add that there would have to be some level of verifiability to this. We wouldn't just rely on neighbors. Nowadays, we can do a lot with the cameras, and we can see if what they're talking about is legitimate. Just using Ring cameras. Is there a lot of transient traffic in and out? Well, that's easy enough usually to figure out. Are there gunshots? Do we have multiple neighbors who are verifying that? And it would be a process. It's certainly not it's not so rapid that we don't have a chance to pause and reflect on it, and also make contact with the owner of the residence and tell them that these are the issues we're having. They need to change, and that's the goal, is to have enough teeth to force people to want to change. And again, in the Balsam Street, that particular owner didn't really seem to care about the ordinance we had. Although the ordinance we had, I think, to some degree, does incorporate the volume of calls for service. It just wasn't a way to really, wasn't really a good way to apply that in the Balsam Street and many other residences that are a problem. So we would certainly, if the council gave us direction, we would certainly try and present something, I think, that comes with a balance that gives you comfort that we're not just taking people's words for it to eliminate people from the neighborhood.
Great. I have a few more questions, but I'll let other people.
Thank you. Do we have, let's go to Ms. Nosler back, and then we'll be back with you, Ms. Holteen.
I just wanted to follow up, because that was where my question was going to be directed. Chief, was just I'm really concerned that this also just becomes like what Councilmember Holteen was talking about, where people are just calling because something is a nuisance to them, like, and annoying to them. And I think what you explained, that this is, something that could, it's not that every time someone calls in, there won't be some due diligence and investigation that goes in to validate any calls for service and things like that. So I just wanted to shout out that was one of my big concerns. So it's good to hear that. I think one thing that could be helpful is maybe just a little bit more of an explanation of what that processes might be in just having some kind of standardized protocol on that.
Yeah, and let me just back up to say we often receive currently calls for service from people who are just annoyed by their neighbor for one reason or another. Our officers, I think, do a really good job of separating fact from fiction, verifying those kind of things. So this isn't new to us. We know that sometimes somebody will call about a neighbor's dog, or they'll call about something the neighbor's doing, and we're not just we're not just taking the word for it, we're verifying it. Our officers, I guess my point is, our officers are used to this. This wouldn't be out of line with what we already do, but I think we could probably, and I don't want to speak for Carmen, but I think we can certainly work in some of those concepts into this, into an ordinance, if we're given direction that addresses that and gives you some sense of some sense that we are acting on facts and not just on feelings.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Additional question or discussion among council? Ms. Dozeman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what is the extent of this issue? Are we talking several properties, or is there like a specific area that we're kind of referencing? I'm kind of just I'm trying to wrap my head around like the extent of the issue.
And it's a good question, Ms. Dozeman, and I meant we probably should have started with that, maybe with some perspective, and I'll let the chief, he probably has a better number. It's, I'm hoping that this ordinance wouldn't have to get used all that much, but anytime we have even one disorderly house, it's amazing how much staff time it takes to deal with that one property. But we definitely have more than one. I think there's several in each district, but Chief, you want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, I don't think I can give you an exact number, because there are homes that are alleged to be in violation. There are homes that we believe that are in violation, and there's homes that we know are in violation. They're not many, but they exist throughout the city, and where they do exist, boy, we get a lot of feedback. I don't sit in patrol, so I don't hear it every day. I'll ask Commander Pickett or Chief Lorenz if they have any more information on that. Chief Lorenz, do you have anything?
I would say that the idea behind this is to be proactive, because if we don't have the tool, then it's as Mr. Goff said, then it takes time to catch up, and it takes a lot of staff time to figure the thing out. I think we put an ordinance in place so that if something fits that ordinance, then we don't have any downtime. We can get right to it. So I would call this proactive. And I would also add that, certainly another check and balance is for the courts. So if we were to write such a case, we would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to the court, and the judge would render the decision on this. So I think it's not just an opportunity for neighbors to harass other neighbors or to trump up a case. We would have to have a very, very valid evidence-based case for a judge to make a decision on.
So from the memo, my understanding is that this would kind of like build upon section 1526. It's not necessary, or are we having like a disorderly house and a chronic nuisance? And would this, like, what is the counterpart for businesses as opposed to homes? Or would this include like business uses as well?
It absolutely, Councilor Dozeman, it could, the ordinance could address commercial properties. That's another way that the existing code perhaps lacks, or as a whole, as we put it, it clearly applies to residential properties. And if there are, which I understand is usually the case, but if we were to have commercial properties where this would be an issue too, new code language would be needed to address that. And it would, as DC Lawrence said, be another tool, or Chief Murtha, I believe, another tool, right? So whether it expands upon existing code section 1526, or is an additional, right, code language in perhaps another chapter or another code section or another article within chapter 15, it essentially would build upon what is there now to give it more teeth, make it bigger and better. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Ms. Weaver and then back to Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you very much. And I do want to express my support for this. I just, like others have expressed, I want to make sure that we define it. My concern, along with the neighbors hassling neighbors, is just clarifying in whatever ordinance that this does not apply to the group home situation, because those are post drug and rehab situations. And I just think that to avoid some of the rallying in some of the group home issues that we've been dealing with in the past couple of years, I would really appreciate it if there could be some language that just defines group homes as not a nuisance situation. I don't know if that makes sense. I know Mr. Goff has helped us quite a bit through the group home issue, and I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe I just add to that. I mean, obviously, group homes are used by rights in certain zone districts, and speaking specifically about the sober living homes that we have in Wheat Ridge, you know, that I think though, even those homes could rise to a level of chronic nuisance, right? And I don't think we want to exempt them from this ordinance if they do rise. I mean, if they're having drug activities unrelated to addiction services and you know, loud music and you know, whatever, prostitution or whatever going on.
Sure.
I think that, yeah, but I know what you're saying, and I think we could come up with language that speaks to that
Yeah.
group homes as they're allowed are not a nuisance just because they have 11 people in the house, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Council Member Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, the Balsam House that's being referenced tonight, we had a chance to meet with those neighbors, and recently I actually sort of met up when it was a virtual meeting because it was during COVID, and I met one of the neighbors in person, and this house is, you know, just down the street from me. And, you know, I got together with her and I was just, you know, talking, I was like going on about how great Wheat Ridge is and all the charms of Wheat Ridge. And, you know, she said to me, she's like, I've just got to be really honest, like the house, the nuisance house has been such a bad experience for us that we really haven't felt that way about the city. And if it didn't get resolved, we were going to move. And I think I just want to share that because, you know, hopefully we don't have to activate this often, but, you know, for the real properties that this really is a problem. I mean, it's severely impacting the quality of life for the people who live around them, and, you know, for them feeling, you know, safe and secure in our community. So I think it's really important that we strengthen our police department's tools to do this. And I support drafting an ordinance and not doing communications or really not even trying to build on the framework of an ineffective ordinance. I'm up for tackling it from, you know, the ground up here if we're going to do this. And, you know, a couple things for me that are important. The integration of the landlord and the tenants and the notification and abatement is really important, because as we learned on Balsam, the problem tenants were from a problem landlord. And it's not always tenants and landlords. It's could be people who are homeowners, or can be huge problems too. But that, you know, co-accountability, ultimately recognizing that if a landlord can't take accountability for their tenants, that is the landlord's problem at some point too. So I really like how that's been addressed and proposed in here. And I like that we would have more teeth and strength for that accountability. You know, the question about businesses, we have some businesses that are a little bit of a problem too. They tend to have a different like range of problems than a house in a neighborhood, but they can create some pretty severe nuisances as well. So I would be interested in looking at how we'd address commercial and industrial and mixed use properties as well in that. And then I guess this is a little bit more of a question, but at the end of the day, like what are the enforcement tools that we would be looking at? I think the enforcement of this is the tricky part, right? Like we on Balsam in a way kind of got lucky that they had something that we could condemn the house over and force them to fix that before it was habitable. But you know, what kind of enforcement, and what are some of the like sort of the escalating enforcements? I mean, do we offer, do we have an ombudsman in the city anymore? Like how would that kind of escalate? Like how would the enforcement options be that we would be presented to consider for this?
I could address sorry, Chief.
I was going to say, Carmen, that's probably something you can address better than I can, but it falls into the pattern of many of our ordinances where it's sort of an escalating situation, I think. But go ahead, Carmen. Sorry.
No, be perfectly fine. Amongst the tools that already exist, right, are as Chief said, escalating fines. We under Chapter 15 have an abatement process. The real, or one of the sort of the carrot and stick mechanisms that we have seen in other chronic nuisance ordinances that we don't have, right? A tool that we would like to add is potentially the incentive to, as Councilor Hulteen, you alluded to the co-accountability, right, of landlord and tenant, and to incentivize the landlord to voluntarily come to the table with the city for an abatement plan, and to get the owners, if possible, buy-in to a plan, which would then eliminate the need to have further enforcement consequences on her or his property. Most importantly, or maybe meaningful or impactful for a landowner, are things like liens, right? True cost to them as an owner that they have to ultimately pay, whether they have tenants or not, or as you mentioned, right, code enforcement, red tagging, do not occupy kinds of remedies as well. But enforcement could be abatement efforts, which we have, incentivizing voluntary abatement plans that if they fail to be met, if they are broken by the owner who's entered into them, that then immediate right citation into court and immediate remedies that are more quick than what we usually have are then authorized if they knowingly and willingly enter into what's basically like a plea agreement, an abatement plan with us. And again, escalating fines, those are other kinds of motivations and incentives and remedies that we hope to have. The more, I guess, in the menu, right, of those remedial kinds of options, the better, because some remedies is, right, all the PD folks on here will tell you, some remedies work for some and not for others. So to have a more of a menu of options in terms of enforcement and ways to approach and skin a cat, the more the better, right? Because people respond differently to things.
And then just one last thing. So So landlords and tenants are in a legal agreement, so they're bound by certain legal obligations. What happens when we work with, if there's a problem home and one of the abatements is for the tenants to be evicted? How does that work against like their lease in terms of the landlord? I mean, I know we're not all lawyers here. Some of us are, but not all of us. But I mean, does that run into a problem where the tenants are a problem, but not violating the lease, and the landlord can't kick the tenants out because of the lease would be a violation of the lease? Like, have we encountered that, or is that something that we have to take into consideration?
And, principally, clearly, that would be an issue, right? A contractual or a civil issue between those two parties. So is that something that the city sort of delves into? Maybe not directly. Is it a consideration, right? Is it something you all as policymakers should think about? Sure. And I'd say, although I'm not an expert in landlord tenant law or advise landlords in my daily life, most leases, right, that I've experienced and seen do require that occupancy comply with all laws, right? That occupancy of the premise be not only what's intended and listed as the purpose under the lease, but that it be in compliance with all applicable laws, right? So to that point, a tenant who has led to a property being found a chronic nuisance property or otherwise used for unlawful purposes would probably violate the lease as a baseline.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Beery, I had a question maybe I will address to you. It's helpful that you've called the potential ordinance in number 1 or the strengthening of the ordinance in the code section 1526 a tool. I use tools and have used tools. If you were to say which of these is the better tool, what would your advice be to council?
While the people who use these tools in their day-to-day are people other than me, this would be your chief, your DC, your commander. I think, Mayor, certainly the bigger tool, the more powerful tool is one. And whether that power is more effective, I think is maybe a better question for Commander Pickett or Chief Murtha or DC Lawrence.
And I maybe, would sort of throw in there what's more flexible and gives us better options to deal with issues that happen in the real world.
In my view, that's without question one, right? I think in option one, having another code section, a bigger code section that doesn't simply build on what's there, I think that would provide the PD with more flexibility, with more heads on the same tool.
Sure. And Chief, I'll give you the opportunity to sort of weigh in also.
Yeah, I agree with what Ms. Beery said. I would suggest that my orientation around an ordinance would be to focus on the landlord. We don't, many of the leaseholders in a lot of these problem houses really don't have enough skin in the game to make it meaningful or cause quick action. My experience with, I guess in leases I've had was that, there are provisions that not only do you have to obey the law, but costs. Usually there's a cost incurred type of provision in there that if I incur the cost as a landlord, I pass it on to you, and if you don't pay me, you're in violation of the lease. And so the best results I've had in policing myself were to deal with the landlord. That's what happened on Balsam Street. We certainly went around the people who were living there, and we dealt with that person. That's what happened in many of our other success stories. And a lot of the failures were trying to deal with the leaseor up in front instead of going around. So I think the pressure is there, but I think option one gives us a chance to start over and really get past some of the shortfalls that the current ordinance has. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if John or Jim want to add anything to that.
Jim?
Yeah, I would agree that the property owner is what we focus on in our code enforcement activities. That has given us the best bang for the buck, and it has cured the problem under most circumstances. We do use that lien option to collect our fines and fees in that manner, and that's been very successful. If you're aware of our statistics that we have from our administrative citation program, works really good.
Thank you. Additional discussion or questions from council before we try to generate a consensus? Council member Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with number one. I think it's very important to be proactive and have it cut and dry, very simple and plain about what it is, what is a nuisance. I also would like to, for me, a nuisance is also public safety. Okay, I mean, people, these things can happen like in the house or whatever, but also they can come out to the street. Public safety is a nuisance to me. It would be. So I think rewriting it and having it very plain and covering the bases so there's no subjective, parts in there, this is what we're looking at is what nuisance is. And you get these many days after you've been told about this or all that kind of stuff, just have it all written out. And then there's no question. Because now it seems like it's very ambiguous.
Okay, thank you. Let's, Councilwoman Hulteen.
Thank you. I was just going to go ahead and ask for a consensus if no one else has any comments. So I'd like to ask for a consensus from council that we direct staff to move forward with the preparation of a draft CNO. Based on the feedback and comments tonight, we would like to include residential and commercial and industrial properties. We are interested in focusing on enforcement with the landlord. And we also appreciate the recommendations that have come forth from the attorney's office on how to best strengthen that. Have I forgotten anything that people mentioned that was important? With consideration on how we differentiate between true nuisance properties and neighbors who think their neighboring property is a nuisance, but yet allowable.
Let's see a hands in favor of that. Looks like we have a consensus to move in that direction. Does that give you all the information that you're looking for? Okay. Well, thank you very much for bringing agenda item number 1. We will conclude that item and we will go to agenda item number 2, which is not is along the same vein. So, Mr. Goff, I'll go ahead and send it back to you, and we'll take that route one more time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second item, street racing, is another issue. I know as long as I've been with the city, this issue comes up often, and I think we've had the same issues with trying to enforce this code. So police department would like council direction on similar to the last item, strengthening our code to deal with the nuisance of street racing. So Chief Murtha, you want to start?
Yes, again, Commander Pickett will give you a presentation. I think really I would say the bulk of the work here is in the enforcement part of it, but I'll let Commander Pickett explain why that is and how that is, and we'll go from there. So, John?
Thank you, Chief. So as Mr. Goff stated, this is a more prolific problem than the issue with the homes. Street racing has traditionally been an issue here in Wheat Ridge. We have I-70 running right through the middle of us. We have Wadsworth and Kipling and Sheridan as well running right through us. So not only do we get gatherings here in Wheat Ridge, but when these street groups are moving from one venue to another, they go through Wheat Ridge. This summer, we had several instances of groups trying to meet at either our Big Lots parking lot or the what's now the Hobby Lobby Home Goods parking lot. One of which we had a video of upwards of 1,000 cars in the parking lot that were starting a gathering. Luckily, our officers were able to get with the people who had started this gathering and convince them to move along. But in the meantime, we still got a lot of complaints from the neighbors when they left our jurisdiction to go to other jurisdictions. They're driving these loud vehicles, they're driving unsafely through our city. So again, with the way that we go about as the police department to deal with these issues are on individual basis on each person, what kind of crime they're committing, which in this case is typically a traffic crime, which has little or no effect on deterring people from doing this. So what we're looking for is something that we can actually use to stop the problem before it starts. We've seen that some of the jurisdictions around us are actually seizing vehicles that are used in street racing. And street racing can be just like the term, where two cars or multiple cars are racing through the city, to where also there's meetups where there's shows of speed, burnout pits, all sorts of actions that happen within a parking lot that are illegal. With looking at these jurisdictions around us, we've seen that Denver and Aurora have ordinances that allow them to seize the vehicles. And if we have a deterrence such as this, we found that these street racers take great pride in their cars. That's why they're into this as a hobby. They're on websites, they're members of groups. Some of these cars we've seen are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars with modifications that they put in. And the threat of taking that away from them or keeping it from them for a certain amount of time is something that would really help us keep them out of Wheat Ridge altogether. We've been lucky and we've been good, I think, in this last year about being able to get intelligence on where these meetups were going to be and shut down the parking lots before they get there. We've had a lot of help from the property owners in allowing us to do this. But as we get good at this, they get good about keeping the secret of where they're going to meet. And with social media the way it is now, oftentimes we won't get the heads up before they've already started getting hundreds of vehicles in a parking lot. So if we were able to do a campaign, go out there and educate the citizens of the ordinances we do have and be able to warn them about what the potential outcome would be if they brought that into Wheat Ridge, I think we can deter this more effectively. And that's what we've asked Ms. Berry to look into, which, as you've seen through her memo, has a lot of good ideas on how to do this.
Can I just jump in there real quick before Carmen goes? I see the judge is on, and I didn't ask him to speak on this, but Judge, you've had some experience with traffic law and the changes lately and sort of the ability to deter bad driving through the court system. And it seems to be as another problem that we're trying to overcome here with our ordinance. Did you have a comment on just what happens nowadays with people who fail to appear in court or to disregard these citations? So maybe there's more context as to why we're looking for a different method of enforcement.
Yeah, sure, Chief. Thanks. Good evening to everybody. Yeah, a law was passed. It just went into effect last month. And basically what it says is that if it's a traffic infraction, and I think what Commander Pickett's talking about is something more serious, it's a traffic offense. But with traffic infractions, if you fail to appear, in the old days, the court could put a hold on your license. Now we can't do that. Same thing with fines. So if it's a traffic infraction and a fine is imposed and you don't pay the fine, in the old days, we could notify DMV and they would put a hold on your license. Well, we can no longer do that. What we can do and do with traffic offenses, those are the more serious matters, like reckless driving more than 25 miles per hour over the posted limit, careless driving, no proof of insurance, we can impose jail. So jail is an alternative to any traffic offense, but we have lost that leverage, that ability to put a hold on someone's license in a traffic infraction case, to be able to get them to come to court or to be able to get them to pay a fine. So there has been some weakening of the sentencing weight, the motivation of the sentence compared with last year versus this year.
And I would just say that even those are the sort of lesser crimes, they are the crimes that we more often would encounter. And it seems to embolden these folks to take greater risk, where we end up in this arena where they're in contests of speed and whatnot. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Carmen for her report, but there is a tight-knit group, and we know that deterrence in this case, having this law in the books, they would certainly talk about it. They already do. We have plenty of intelligence to where they're reporting that they won't gather in certain jurisdictions because of the penalty, which states that they could potentially lose their vehicle. Very few seizures, but the threat of it is really what we're talking about here for the most part. But of course, any law in the books is enforceable or needs to be enforceable. So Carmen.
Yeah, thank you, Chief and Judge Randall. As indicated in our memorandum to you, we found 4 existing Colorado jurisdictions that have adopted ordinances such that we're discussing here tonight: Denver, Aurora, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo. And essentially, Mayor and Council, those ordinances operate, as Chief expressed, as a deterrent, right? And the as Commander Pickett said, folks, right, there's a lot of pride in the vehicles that are used sometimes in these activities, and the threat of losing that vehicle is a really effective motivation to, if not prevent the activity from occurring, driving it elsewhere, literally driving it elsewhere. But, you know, we hope also some general deterrent, right, effect would be had. And, you know, I'll be honest, as an attorney, at first blush, I thought, oh my goodness, how are we seizing, you know, the Fourth Amendment issues are many here, and how and why, and can we really, you know, seize vehicles? And our research has revealed that yes, as is often the case, it depends kind of after that, but yes, our research as laid out in our memo reveals that we think such ordinances are defensible. Again, they've been in place in other jurisdictions. That does not mean they're necessarily constitutional, but we believe that they can be crafted as such, and that the other 4 in Colorado are likely defensible. What are important in terms of the characteristics of those ordinances are laid out in my memo. I won't belabor those legal issues, but essentially that they be concrete, that they give clear guidance, that there's not unbridled discretion, that the ordinance is not a ruse or a tool to simply search a vehicle. That's true now, but that needs to be clear in the ordinance, that this is not a tool to simply seize and look for other stuff. And that we really do, Mayor and Council, articulate and rely upon the seizing of the vehicle as one of the community caretaking functions that the police have to take property, in particular when property is used for criminal activity on public roadways, right? Commander Pickett said, you know, that they've had some great success as a PD with getting owners of big parking lots of private property to agree to, hey, that's not okay here. And if you find it here, Wheat Ridge PD, you have our full cooperation and permission to move it on. Well, when activity like street racing, in associated other sorts of vehicular crimes, when those are happening on our public roadways, it really does present a legitimate threat, not only to the folks engaging in that dangerous activity on the public roadways, but other drivers clearly as well. So an ordinance that articulates and relies upon that legitimate government purpose to take property, that's important in our view to the constitutionality of the ordinance as well. And real big picture, because I was curious about this, how do these things work? If the police department gets reliable evidence that rises to basically write any application for a warrant, evidence that rises to the level of probable cause. If the PD gets evidence that rises to the level of probable cause that a particular vehicle has engaged in conduct that violates the ordinance, Wheat Ridge PD can petition for, again, like signing an affidavit for a warrant, an affidavit with that application for a warrant. Officer who has such probable cause and can articulate it, screenshots. I mean, let's face it, sometimes social media does the hard work for you and gives you the pictures and the person who says this is mine. So gathering the evidence of probable cause that a particular vehicle has been involved in the commission of a crime, submitted to the court with an affidavit as such, and trying to the facts of where these pictures came from, how the evidence was gathered. The ordinance would then authorize the court to issue a TRO, a temporary restraining order, one of the terms of which authorizes the Wheat Ridge PD to seize the vehicle, right? And there is a very quick, and there must be a very quick hearing on that TRO, on the seizure of the vehicle. And there has to be a period of time between the issuance of right, that affidavit, that request for a TRO, and it becoming effective. Built into the ordinance clearly at every opportunity for us to take action is an opportunity for the owner of the vehicle, which includes lien holders of the vehicle, to appeal and to enter any kind of objection or say, wait a minute, I disagree, or that wasn't me, or that's not the car, or whatever. But layering into the ordinance, right, we will ensure that we afford that due process and those procedural opportunities for people to appeal or challenge or object. But if a TRO is obtained by the city to seize the vehicle, then by whatever means, the city would then be authorized to find that vehicle and take it. And again, we would then have a hearing, if no hearing were had before the seizure. Well, in addition to, we'd have a hearing post seizure as well, even if the hearing is had before, during which, right, the merits of the alleged violations would be fully heard by the court. And if indeed violations of the ordinance were proven, and we would again write this as a civil enforcement tool, so we'd be looking at a sort of a preponderance of the evidence standard. If the city met that burden of proving that this vehicle was involved, right, an instrumentality of the sorts of violations that are prohibited, we would ask the court for authorization to impound the vehicle as one of the remedies for any period of time. And that's something that we can talk further about, whether now or when you have draft ordinance language in front of you, if you want to see an ordinance. We note in our memo that Denver, as well as Colorado Springs, other jurisdictions authorize impoundment of a vehicle for up to a year. Now, that doesn't mean they all have to be a year, but once again, talking about the tools that can be a deterrent, the big sticks that are present in this ordinance, losing that vehicle for up to a year's time is a pretty big tool in the tool belt, and a potential effector of behavior. So those are the major outlines of what we see in ordinances that exist. Those are the major issues that we think an ordinance should hit in terms of the legal issues locally.
Thank you. Okay, we'll open this up for questions from council. Councilor Nosler-Beck.
In District 4, we deal with this all the time. We see a lot of it on 44th, or I hear a lot of it on 44th, but I wanted to ask, it looks like we looked at other jurisdictions, but one thing that I also know happens pretty regularly is a lot of racing. And you mentioned how everything's tied together with I-70 and the city. And is the State Patrol doing anything, or CDOT, as it relates to street racing on I-70? I mean, it's one of those things that makes us a prime location, right? Is that there's lots of different options. And so I just want to make sure that if we're going to do this, that the right hand's talking to the left.
I think I can address that. The whole metro area has basically a part-time task force that gets together and works together to address this issue. It includes Colorado State Patrol, it includes Denver, us, Thornton, most of the jurisdictions in the area. And we communicate with one another. The issue with I-70 is we can't really leave that to Colorado State Patrol to do their enforcement on there, for the fact that in the Golden area, there may be, Golden meaning a Jefferson County metro area, there may be 2 or 1 or 0 state troopers working at a time. So it's really up to Wheat Ridge to do the enforcement up there. And to answer your question, we are also communicate with them and work with them on deterrence through the metro area.
So, and just as a kind of, I guess it's a follow-up to that. So does Wheat Ridge, and this is me just asking a question because I don't know the answer, does Wheat Ridge then patrol on I-70?
Yeah,
We can. Okay.
Yes, we have full jurisdiction on I-70.
Okay. Got it. I learned something. Thank you.
We also handle all the accidents on I-70.
Okay, that explains what I've been seeing. Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple questions. One, are there any plate readers on Wadsworth now or proposed in the future?
Not on Wadsworth right now. We do have a mobile LPR license plate reader. Our license plate readers right now are up on the I-70 and Kipling corridor. That's where our LPRs are right now.
And then would they, thank you. And then are there any cameras on like the Wadsworth corridor in Wheat Ridge or Kipling that the police department could use to, if, you know, these speeders are running down those areas to kind of through the city?
I think the only thing that's up there is the CDOT cameras, but I'm not sure if John knows any other cameras up there.
Actually, the business owners up and down both Kipling and Wadsworth, a lot of them have video. We've used these videos in the past to reconstruct accidents. Anymore, a great majority of our accidents are on video because of businesses having their own video that hits the street. And we do often go to those businesses and ask for their video to help us with these kind of investigations. We've yet to use it in street racing, but it's not beyond the realm by any means.
Just to add on to that, those cameras almost always are impossible to read a license plate. I think that's, you know, the license plate reader program is specifically geared towards that. And some of the high resolution CDOT cameras might, but what we use those cameras for from the businesses is really just to see, you know, who was the primary, you know, what was the primary cause of an accident, more general stuff, but we can glean a lot of information from those business cameras as well if we're working through an investigation on street racing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I definitely kind of like with the houses, I definitely agree that the most enforcement and the most definition that we can get, the better. I do have a question though. How many street races do we have, and how many cars do you think we would possibly be impounding, and do we have the capacity to do that?
What I can tell you is we get street racing complaints often. I don't know, have the specific number. Normally, by the time we get an officer to respond, they're gone. They're no longer there. Obviously, on I-70, a lot of that is street racing through the city, and if we don't have somebody on specifically assigned to I-70, they're out of our jurisdiction before we know it. So I don't think there's a quantifiable way to say it. I would suggest to you that this is more of a preventative measure or a proactive measure than it is sort of a response to a numeric number of street racing. We know that these gatherings that Commander Pickett talked about will often result in challenge matches in the street. We're trying to prevent, I think, a serious accident in the future. So this is a little more proactive than reacting to what we're seeing. We certainly have people who complain about racing on I-70 all the time. We have people who complain about street racing in the city, but there's no specific number. As far as how many vehicles we would impound, I think this is aimed at deterrence, quite frankly. I was going to talk about this maybe in staff reports, but I'll say now, in 2020, we had 47 cases where vehicles eluded us. In 2021, we had 145 cases where vehicles eluded us. We would expect most vehicles wouldn't stop. That's been the rule of thumb. They're souped up cars and they know we won't chase them. But if we had the ability to go back, recreate it, and then, on a very infrequent basis, we might be able to make a case. It would certainly send a message to the greater community that Wheat Ridge doesn't tolerate it. So I guess the ends would justify the means here. In other words, if we could take a car and make a difference to the street racing community by advertising it, it wouldn't take many. It would take, 2 or 3, and we have the capacity for that. And I think we have plenty of capacity at Connolly's to impound it. I'm not exactly sure where these vehicles would go, but I think Connolly's is our tow agent, and we're not looking to impound 1,000 cars. We know that we're not going to get 1,000, and more often than not, they're going to flee from us. But the ones we do go back to and catch and get on camera, that would be an example we would publicize and talk about it to make the difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question about the impounding part here. So these cars can be worth like $100,000. So if you're advertising that we're impounding cars, would that be in Wheat Ridge? And I was reading where they don't have to be indoors. They can just be within a fenced area. I can already see the writing on the wall. If somebody had a $100,000 car one way or another, they're going to try to get through a fence to get a car. Unless you impound them, what do? Take the tires off, or? I don't know. I guess I watch too much TV.
I've seen that plenty of times, but since we know the owners, it's a pretty easy case to make. Even I could make that case to figure out who done it when they drive through a fence. But those are secure lots. Generally, they're surrounded by other vehicles. It's really hard to get in there and get them to begin with. Not impossible. And if they want to break down the fence and have their car for a couple hours, I can guarantee you a Wheat Ridge officer will probably be knocking on their door before too long, because once we've impounded it, we've gone through the process that Carmen laid out. We've gotten all the information we need, and now we've collected them up. So I don't know about the security of Connolly's lot per se. Maybe Jim or John can comment on that, but I don't see that as a problem. As a matter of fact, to drive through a fence with $100,000 car pretty much destroys it. But
Well,
Jim, did you want to add anything, or John?
Chief, I can tell you from my own experience, having had my vehicle stolen and thankfully recovered by the Wheat Ridge Police Department, and it was impounded at Connolly's, and it was in the middle of the lot and it's surrounded by all other cars. So they had to move a lot of cars just for me to get back to see where it was and make a path for me to get out. So I don't think anybody's going to come and try to get their car.
Okay, thank you.
Additional discussion. Division Chief Lorenz.
I just wanted to bring up a point about a couple of cases that you may have been familiar with. I think they're extreme cases, but again, I think our goal is to be proactive and prepare for the worst in these kinds of cases. If you remember, it's been about 4 years. So a group of car enthusiasts and motorcyclists closed down I-25 in Denver. They shut down the entire interstate and burning rubber and different kinds of activities. The police came, they were able to identify at least 2 vehicles, and those were 2 that were impounded. Another situation was about 2 years ago in Aurora on 225. I don't believe these were car enthusiasts, but they were enthusiastic about something, and it was a protest, and they also closed down 225. There was also vehicles that tried to drive through their barricade, and shots were fired, if you remember that particular incident. A lot of times when you get a lot of people together and there's a lot of testosterone or alcohol or whatever going on, people can get hurt and it can be dangerous. So I think what we are looking for is, again, additional tools to be proactive. If something horrible happened, it could very likely happen on I-70, and it could very likely happen within our jurisdiction. And if we had this type of a tool to seek out vehicle owners and seize that property, then I think that would be helpful to us.
Thank you. Council Member Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor Starker. So I'm looking for some input per the memo here. They're specifically asking us to give guidance on if we are going to be penalizing owners of vehicles, drivers of vehicles, or both. I would like to propose that we penalize both, unless there's clear directive or good reason from the police department not to do that. Is there any objections from counselors before I put together a consensus on that?
The only thing I would add is that if it's a stolen vehicle, I don't think you would want to go after the owner of the vehicle.
Good point. All right, and then the other thing they're looking for input is if impoundment for 1 year is something that the police department feels would be a sufficient deterrent, and something that the police department feels that they can manage and would work for their capacity.
With talking with Denver and the district attorney over there, we found that the actual impound for a year rarely happens. What happens is a negotiation to return the vehicle to someone who will promise not to give that vehicle to the person who was causing the issues. So best case scenario, we only keep the car for a short time. Worst case scenario, it goes to Connolly's and builds up a whole lot of fees for the owner. So we do have the capacity for what we foresee to happen.
So so that would be drafted then for impoundment up to a year, with the description of the police department to use the impoundment as a negotiation for however that's worded. Is that?
I don't think you'd have to I don't think you'd have to put the wording in there. We would certainly, I don't think Denver's has it, but I think they use it because it's just having that leverage of up to a year certainly gives a lot of leverage in negotiation. And really all we want is safer driving. We're not trying to take somebody's car. We don't want to hold on to it, have anybody file a lawsuit on behalf of that vehicle. but it can certainly change the outcome as opposed to a citation for driving. So up to a year, understanding that, it's sort of like any penalty on the books right now. They're all subject to plea negotiations. I think very rarely do you get a maximum penalty in anything nowadays.
All right, well, we don't have to specify that. All right, if there aren't any other comments from council, then I'd like to.
Actually, I had a question or two before we go to a thing. Ms. Berry, on your ordinance options, you have number 1 and number 2. Is this an either or both recommendation?
No, Mayor, those are each policy choices I wanted council's input on there on the last page, on page 5 of the memo on this, and Councilor Hulteen just sort of went through both of those. And I think what I hear is that on the first issue, on the policy issue, I heard an expression of support for penalties, or the option of penalizing both drivers and owners. And I heard on the second issue some support for the idea that up to a maximum impoundment of a year was palatable to the PD. So, Mayor, both of those issues I would like addressed, and I heard addressed. I think that those could be included in the consensus. That would be great.
Okay. Actually, that wasn't my question. It was really whether we're going to look for an Article 5 in Chapter 13 and or an Article 5 in Chapter 15.
Gotcha. Thank you. Sorry, Mayor.
That's okay.
Not the policy choices, but the ordinance options.
The ordinance options.
That's an either or, and honestly, as the memo indicates, Mayor and Council, I think both locations in the code make some sense. And unless Council has great druthers on that topic, what we bring back to you, we'll perhaps pick the appropriate chapter in case Council really wants to express an opinion on that. More important to me was opinion expressed on the policy choices.
Thank you. That answers my questions. If there's nothing further, we'll go to Councilwoman Hulteen for hopefully a consensus motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask for a consensus, directing staff to move forward with drafting at their discretion new Article 5 for Chapter 13 and or Chapter 15 to strengthen the city's ability to get ahead of and enforce deterring street racing as a public nuisance. And we are in support of penalizing owners of vehicles and drivers of vehicles with the exception of if the vehicle had been stolen, in which case the owner would not be penalized. And then we would be looking for a meaningful deterrence of impounding up to a year vehicles that are involved.
Okay, if you would like to see that consensus, please raise your hand. Well, looks like we have consensus on that motion. If that provides the information that you require, is there anything that kind of does it?
I think that's it. Thank you, Council.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, thank you. And I will, with tongue in cheek, say that I hope this doesn't apply to street racing of bicycles on the criterium and runner road races that do street racing on our streets and highways through the town. So, but I know that you're a cagey and very qualified law firm, and you will make those distinctions in this ordinance. So, thank you very much for that discussion and allowing me to sort of make a little humor in the midst of it. All right. We will go to agenda item number 3. That's our staff reports, and I'll go to Mr. Goff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a police department evening here, so we have the chief, and it looks like maybe Mr. Pickett and Mr. Lawrence is going to stick around. I think we have a few other updates that we would like to address this evening. So, Chief.
Well, good. Well, it's nice to have you here. It's not all police all the time, but when you're here, we welcome you and want to hear from you. So, Chief, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like my wife says, I can take you in little doses, so I apologize for hearing myself speak so much tonight. I was hopeful there would be an opportunity to kind of give an update on some of the things in the police department, your police department, and just kind of get people caught up to speed on what's going on. So tonight, it's a little bit about what things are really rising to the level of my concern, I guess, and things that are good and bad with the state of policing in general, and about your Wheat Ridge Police Department. So I did put together a little bit of a PowerPoint. I'll see if I can screen share it here for you, and we'll go through this together. Let's see.
Looks good.
Is it coming up for you?
Came up on my screen. Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. It's not on mine, but that doesn't matter. I have it on my other screen. So just in general about the police department, and bear with me on this, but you know, the last 2 years, policing in America, policing in Wheat Ridge has really become much more complex than it used to be. Why do I say it's complex? Because almost every challenge that comes up doesn't just have an immediate effect on policing, but it certainly has a downstream impact on what we do in Wheat Ridge and in policing in general. Just some examples of that. You know, when we're having trouble hiring professional staff because people don't want to return to work, or they don't feel ready to come back, COVID issues, those sort of things, it certainly puts an extra burden on our officers, and that takes officers time away from some of the things that we're asking them to do. COVID has you know, caused us to kind of jumble schedules around to make up for manpower, woman power, people power shortages. So you know, we're having that downstream effect of COVID in more ways than just what we've talked about in the past. And the ongoing national narrative is tough for officers ever to get away from. They go home, they turn on the TV, and it's all about policing and what's good and bad about the profession. And it's tough because you used to get a break from it. So there's a lot of complex issues, but some of the ones that I want to talk about tonight, and in no specific order of priority. The first one I wanted to talk about, well, let me talk about what we'll go over tonight. A little bit about recruitment, hiring, and retention. That's a big issue in policing, not just in Wheat Ridge, but across the country. Crime, traffic enforcement, and our call load. I wanted to give you an update on the legislative ordinances that you've given us, the tools you've already given us. Tonight we asked for 2 more, but I wanted to give you some feedback on what we've been able to do so far with what you've given us, because I think that's a really positive story over the last 2 years. Certainly my emphasis on relationship-based policing and those efforts and where they stand in this moment in time, and a little bit about our focus area, which has been I-70 and Kipling, trying to do some work around that. So let me know if these slides are switching over, because I can't tell, but you see that. Okay. So just to start off, a little bit about recruitment, hiring, and retention. You know, this year we added 6 new officers. We brought them to the council. You got to meet 6 very great people, I think. We currently have 5 officers in the academy, and we're doing pretty well in our staffing. Average number of officers that leave Wheat Ridge in any given year is 6 to 7 per year. That's what we've seen for retention. In 2020, 4 officers left. In 2021, 8 officers left. We know we have 2 officers who are in process of leaving right now. So we're not over our number. We'd like to retain more of that talent, but Wheat Ridge has has a history of about these numbers. So we're in balance, at least with what was going on before COVID. We haven't really gotten out of balance with our staffing numbers. Our current staffing authorized 85. We're at 83. At the end of December, we were at 85 and authorized, and we had 85, which is amazing, really. If you consider what my counterparts are talking about in Lakewood and Arvada and their struggles to hire, retain, and keep numbers up, this really speaks to Wheat Ridge in general, to the support we get in Wheat Ridge, and to the culture of the Wheat Ridge Police Department, I think. But it is a bit of a struggle. We get about half the applicants we got 5 years ago. when we put out an advertisement, we do that now every 6 months for an academy. We almost have a running advertisement for officers. We're only getting about half or even less than half the numbers that we had just 5 years ago. Luckily, we're finding qualified applicants. And what we talk about is we just need 5 or 6 applications as long as they're perfect. But of course, we don't get that. We look for a volume of applications to kind of keep us above water. We're getting enough, but we're really on the edge right now where it's starting to look like it's getting to be slim pickings. We have a constant struggle with a loss of prestige for this profession. People used to come in droves to try and get a job with the police department. They didn't question their career decision. They didn't look at other opportunities. This was what they wanted to do, to be a public servant, to be a police officer. And it was a simple decision. Those things are much more complex now. Again, we're in a complex environment. Our hiring standards, certainly the relaxed standards in the society around drugs have made it difficult for us to, we've adjusted to some degree, but we certainly are not going to give in totally to some of the changes that the culture has made with respect to drugs in general. And officers have a lot of options. Officers have the upper hand right now. They really do. Not just officers, but people who could be officers have a lot of options. There is a deficit of jobs, as we all know, out there, and the qualified applicants we get could do many other jobs. We're lucky that many of them choose policing, but they could work anywhere. And we still get good qualified applicants. The greatest, in my opinion, the greatest selling point of Wheat Ridge, the Wheat Ridge Police Department, is our culture and our reputation. And internal referral is one of our strengths in our hiring. So I think that speaks well of this department. Again, we won't hire a substandard officer. We will continue to hire great people to work in Wheat Ridge. And we work hard to retain them. A lot of that is the same. A lot of those issues are the same issues that you'll hear nationally. Whether somebody decides to stay with the company is highly dependent on their satisfaction with work, their direct boss, their ability to have opportunity. And we know those things, so we try and capitalize on a lot of those things and make those positives for the people who work in Wheat Ridge. So we're doing well in recruitment, hiring, and retention, and we look to continue to do that. So that's kind of the state of affairs for the Wheat Ridge Police Department. We have 17 professional staff out of 24, and that's where our weakness is right now. We're having trouble getting qualified applicants in to work in our records, to work as community service officers and other areas around the department. But we're creating different strategies to try and address that. So know that you have enough people out here to do the job. But as we look further down this presentation, you'll see that the job has gotten much more, it's gotten busier. It's taken a lot more time. So we'll look at that in a minute. As I scroll down here, I wanted to show this to council, calls, crimes, and crime trends. Starting off with our calls for service. On this panel, you can see the number of calls for service. You can see it through the years. Last year, we had 43,868 calls, which over 2020 was a 16% increase, or 6,000 more calls last year in 2021 than we had in 2020. And it's higher than every year up to 2016. I'm not sure what happened in 16, but we're busy. For the number of officers we have, we're extremely busy. And if you look at the number of CAD reports we have, 27,000 in 2021, you can compare that back to 2016. That's far and away the highest number we have. And the 13,000 case reports is right up there with some of our busier years. So we're very busy is the point. We're extremely busy. Officers are being tasked with handling a lot of calls for service and writing a lot of reports. Unquestionably a busy police department. So let's look at maybe a little bit at the crime we're seeing in Wheat Ridge. I want to paint two pictures for you. First one is a look at persons crimes, crimes against people in the city of Wheat Ridge. If you look at the 2021 column there, you can see the total number of crimes we had. And if you look at the 2020 versus 2021, the last column, the percentage of change, you can see where we're doing well and where we're struggling. The areas where we're struggling, the total number is very small. In homicide numbers, which I think we're off. We didn't have 5 homicides last year. We had 0. There was a statistical problem there, or there was a clerical error there, but we had 0 homicides last year. But where you see robbery, the difference of 4 from year to year isn't statistically a large number, even though it comes out as a very high number. Sex assaults down 18, aggravated felonious assaults down 35, sex offenses against children up 8, and simple assault down 24 for a net of 64 total crime reduction, or 10.5% year over year. I think what's encouraging here really though is to look at the 2021 numbers and not compare them to 2020 when we saw such a crime spike across the nation and across the region. But to compare them back to sort of 2018, 2017, when things were pre-COVID, and see that our numbers are really in line with that. We haven't seen, or we're not seeing right now, the same spike that people talk about nationally. We're seeing some sort of resemblance to what I would call a normal state that precipitated COVID. So that's where we are on persons crimes. Property crimes is a different issue altogether. We saw 2 categories of our property crimes decrease. That was burglary and arson crimes. But we saw great increases in motor vehicle theft, theft of motor vehicle parts, and general theft. And these were most concerning. So as we look at these property crimes, our motor vehicle theft, theft of motor vehicle parts was up 140%, highly attributed to parts from motor vehicle of catalytic converter, but certainly other motor vehicle parts. Catalytic converters, something that plagues the region. Certainly my neighbors having theirs stolen was an eye-opener to me that anybody is at risk. Just so you know, there's about twice as much precious metals in a hybrid vehicle. That's why a lot of times hybrid vehicles are targeted. Why is there more precious metal in a hybrid vehicle's catalytic converter? Because they don't heat up. So they have to have more opportunity to burn off the fumes, and therefore criminals go after those because they get a little bit more money for those catalytic converters. But we've seen those, we've seen a continuing spike in that. We've done educational campaigns. We certainly, you might have heard of our marking campaign where we had AAA come out with us and partner with us, a great success. We're starting to see regional partners do the same thing, but that's certainly not going to resolve the problem. Criminals don't necessarily respect the number when that's on the on those, but at least it gives us a chance to track it back when we apply a marking number on there. Motor vehicle thefts, Mayor, I'm sorry about your truck. Certainly, certainly as the chief law enforcement executive, that's not what you want to hear, that the mayor's vehicle's been stolen. It doesn't reflect well on me, but you know, motor vehicle theft is up, and it's up across the region. It's up across the country. There's a lot of theories on that. There's a lot of speculation on why motor vehicle theft is up. Certainly, the utilization of vehicles to commit further crimes, the utilization of vehicles just for general transport has always been the same, but there's just a spike in motor vehicle theft. What our research tells us is that you know, these vehicles are either old, where criminals are still able to manipulate the vehicle lock to start a vehicle, or they're newer vehicles that don't have a key fob. But more often than not, they're vehicles that are warming up. They're vehicles where somebody inadvertently left the key fob inside of it, and they're crimes of opportunity in many cases where people have a chance to jump in a vehicle on a cold day and steal it. So again, we're combating that where we can. We certainly have both overt and covert operations to try and find those vehicles, but it's really a challenge because geographically, motor vehicle thefts don't necessarily occur in one place. We find stolen motor vehicles that turn up in our I-70 and Kipling corridor all the time, but where they're taken from doesn't always correlate to where they're returned. So it's an interesting study, but one that makes it very difficult for us to point our focus in any one area geographically. And then general theft is up. Package thefts, they were up tremendously in 2020. If anybody has a Ring doorbell camera, or maybe next door, you see your neighbors talking about it all the time. It's just very difficult to follow those trucks around. We have in the past and try to catch people who are watching, but they are very much crimes of opportunity. Our thefts and shoplifting are up. We attribute a little bit of that to people who are living on the margins, and they're just stealing to try and get by. But also, of course, the repeat offenders and the jail standards prevent us from interrupting people who do that consistently. In the past, we did have that tool. So that's a little bit about property crimes. Other crimes and other issues, we have a whole sheet of other crimes such as criminal mischief and that sort of thing. Those really came out to net zero. That was a wash on other crimes and other issues in the police department. What was notable about that report was that drug-related offenses continue to increase in 2021, up by 58%. It's a huge increase, drug-related offenses. Weapon-related offenses rose by 25%, while most other categories, and there's about 15 of them, decreased. We saw an overwhelming increase in drug and weapons offenses, and those are concerning to the police department, police officers, and our interaction for our police officers. So something of concern for me, something that keeps us up at night is knowing that we've got more people out there brandishing weapons, using weapons, and that we're engaging them fairly frequently. So that's a little bit about crime. We're going to talk about homelessness and our response to homelessness. We continue to work in collaboration with our homeless navigator, with our co-responder program for persons experiencing homelessness who might have mental health issues. We continue our outreach program. We're trying to identify people and intervene where we can, and certainly be a good partner in homeless issues. When I arrived here in 2020, I think homelessness was pretty much stabilized. Our moment in time suggested that we hadn't had much of an increase in homelessness, but certainly the summer of 2020 until now, we've seen a spike in that. We hear complaints around homelessness and camps in many areas of the city, and we work hard to mitigate those, to enforce efforts around there. Increasingly, we're hearing concerns about our parks being compromised in many ways by persons experiencing homelessness, by drug activity, and by various illicit activities that are occurring in our parks. That's a focus for us. Last year, we used our rangers. We had a third ranger authorized. We went out and we tried to really address the parks, but that's an area of focus for us again that we need to be in front of. We continue to go out and try and provide services, but in some cases there's enforcement that goes on around this, and certainly that is something that crosses lines with our I-70 and Kipling initiatives. So we are sensitive to what's going on out there, but we're also understand that we can't allow disorder and criminal activity in some of these cases. Your legislative actions and ordinances certainly have given us a tool that we have used, tools, I should say plural, that we've used, I think, very effectively over the last year or two. The massage parlor ordinance, I think, is really one of the ones that is a success story that we should all be we should all talk about, and we're very proud of. 11 of our businesses have been cited for illicit sexual activity. I think that's a pretty high number for a city the size of Wheat Ridge. All 11 are either shut down or in the legal process of being shut down. That's attributed directly to the massage parlor ordinance that allowed us to intervene in this. We've conducted 4 undercover operations. Those are generally done with several businesses in mind, hence 4 operations, but 11 times our officers were solicited for illicit behavior. And we were able to take those to court, and we've been very successful in either negotiating illicit businesses out of activity or the last three, I think, wanted to hire an attorney to negotiate, and we're in the process of negotiating with them. But certainly has changed the dynamic and the perception of people's ability to come to Wheat Ridge for illicit behavior in our massage parlors. Our hotel licensing ordinance, I think we gave a pretty good update on what was going on with our hotel licensing. We're in the process right now. We're getting a lot of good feedback and results. Since we're down the Howard Johnsons, after they have closed its 8 hotels, but 7 out of the 8 have submitted have actually been approved for their license, for their hotel license, I should say. Our crime prevention team is reviewing security plans for these businesses. We're making adjustments. They're learning what a security plan is, but we're working diligently to get them on track. And one of our hotels, of course, Howard Johnson's changed its zoning to become workforce housing. But we know that we'll have another hotel opening up in Clear Creek. We look forward to working with them. I think the forced collaboration, if you will, has been beneficial to the police department, and I think it's been enlightening to the owners. We've seen so far very good results from this. I will say, as a side note, in December was the first time the American Hotel dropped off the top 5, our list of top 5 calls for service. I hope it's not because they've limited calls for service, but that they've changed their business practices. But the American Hotel in the last month was not on our list of top 5 calls for service, and that was new. And I want to attribute that in and of itself to the message that was sent, that we're not just going to be soft on businesses that are operating outside the bounds. And I think that message was sent with this ordinance. So continues to be a work in progress. I don't have a slide for it, but our traffic ordinances, I know there was concern when council directed us to bring before them ordinances on solicitation in the median, solicitation in the roadway, around the safety of the persons, especially in certain areas of high traffic, high speed, I-70 and Kipling and Wadsworth and some of the other routes. While I think it's an overwhelming success, I will say we've only issued 2 citations. And I hope that assuages some of the fear any counselor might have had that we were going to abuse that and just start citing everybody. What it's given us is leverage to talk to people and educate them on why they shouldn't be in the median, why they shouldn't be in the roadway. Some of the state legislative ordinances took away our ability to have a conversation with somebody that we thought might be doing something illicit. This gives us the ability to intercept people and just have a conversation and say, we don't want you in the roadway. We don't want you to get run over. So we're very thankful for that. We use those, we issue those citations judiciously. We don't want to have a reputation for harassing folks who are just trying to get by. And I think the outcome of that has been, again, very positive. And part of it is because we haven't issued 80 or 100 citations for that. So I wanted to bring that one up. The tobacco regulations that were passed. We've done 1 undercover operation so far. We're actually training our cadet corps. John Pickett oversees our cadets. We're training them to be our youthful offenders. In other words, to go in there and to purchase tobacco products. So that continues to be a work in progress. We are reacting to any complaints very quickly, where we get complaints about the sale of tobacco, and that's certainly an ongoing. That'll be an ongoing ordinance that we continue to work on and continue to try and put some time and effort into. But it is a very it is a lot of work for the few people we have assigned to take on these tasks, if you will. Next, we'll talk about something that's really near and dear to me, which is our relationship-based policing and our efforts around that. These last 2 years have been very tough for somebody like me who really wants to push this agency out in front of the community, talk to the community. Where we can, we do. We certainly do. A couple of the pictures here illustrate some of our interactions. I think the one in the upper left is Blue Santa. That's our officers engaged with the Optimist Club, bringing toys and delivering toys, candy for cops, just an interaction around Halloween. Our National Night Out was a pretty good success. Some of our programs at the schools and other places we continue to foster those relationships. We're looking forward to the end of the pandemic, or at least the restrictions around the pandemic, where we can go out and talk to our community. Our Cops in the Community event at the Recreation Center, we met a lot of people out there, was well received, and we look to ramping that back up, maybe doing that over at some other places throughout the city as the weather breaks, but we're excited about those opportunities. But really what underlies the whole relationship-based policing is our individual officers going out and making relationships on each interaction, whether it's a negative interaction or a positive one, trying to build some rapport with our community. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that from our officers. So we're still training to it. We're still working with it. And we're still hearing a little bit more and more about how wonderful our officers are when they sit down and create a relationship with our community that might be outside of whatever the issue or the call for service was, but trying to connect with our people. So we continue on that path. And I'm encouraged by that. Our area of enforcement, I think we've talked about this multiple times, I-70 and Kipling. When Jefferson County jail standards were such that that we weren't able to take enforcement in other areas, we really focused on cleanup efforts. Last year we did 12 cleanups with CDOT, multiple efforts with our Parks and Rec and Public Works folks. Really tried to change the visual aspect of it. And then we've gone and reached out to our businesses in the I-70 community. We've engaged our community, and where we have to, we've taken enforcement action. I hope that when people drive through there, they're seeing a positive, a more positive outcome or a review of that area. Not just because we make people disappear, because we're getting them services, we're working with them, we're educating them, and we're forcing, we're forcing them to talk to our homeless navigator in a way. We don't force anybody to do anything, but we're forcing them to have those conversations, and we've seen some great results. So I'm very proud of the work that our SROs did, because they took the entire summer to go over there and focus, get to know the people in I-70 and Kipling. Spent the entire summer over there. Our community services team goes over there all the time to work with folks. Some of the hazards of it are we've displaced some people into the community, and now we get complaints from some community members that people are in the parks or people are in other areas. We know that there's going to be a bit of an outfall from our efforts there, but we're working for those kind of ripples into the community to try and clean that up as well, to make sure that we haven't just pushed people along the way, that we continue to get them matched up with services. So this last year, again, jail challenges because of COVID, economic challenges, professional challenges have been tremendous, but the men and women of this law enforcement agency continue to do the work. Despite a tremendous workload, we've had more stops, citations, and arrests than we had last year by far. That just really speaks well to the people we hire. They continue to do the job despite whatever obstacles are put in front of them. So that's a real quick kind of 10-cent tour of the department in 2021. As we look to 2022, we really look to focus on the 5 things that I talk about all the time, which is relationship-based policing, which is training, which is leadership, the sense of family among this police department, continued proactivity out there to make sure that officers are earning their keep every day. With that, I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. I knew I was going to be speaking a little bit at the beginning, so I don't want to speak anymore because I'm sure somebody's ready to go and jump out the window after hearing my voice. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have about your police department, what we're doing. I will say that the incident we had on 29th in Sheridan, we've had a lot of services provided to those officers directly involved and indirectly involved. We continue to work with them to try and manage our way through this, but quite frankly, there's been a lot of folks who are really questioning, and a lot of people who are concerned, and I'm concerned about the people who are involved. So know that those officers, they feel it, even when they make a decision that really it's clear cut and out of their hands. It's very difficult for them to take that lightly. So I wanted everybody to know that we continue to give them.
Thank you very much for a great report on the department. And I know I speak for many of our citizens and majority to say, you do a great job for our community, and we appreciate the work that our police force does. So questions for the chief?
Chief, you want to, there you go. Yeah, stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Chief, I had one, but just to kind of kick it off, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on questions. You had a 58 increase in drug activity. Is this opioid related? Are these assaults, for opioid use, or how do you encounter that?
Yeah, so our drug activity is really just drug activity. We have different categories for assaults and whatnot, but this is where you see drug dealing, drug use, drug abuse. It might be paraphernalia that people find. Certainly, we are not immune from the fentanyl and opioid epidemic that sweeps across the country. We've, in most police trade magazines and experts will talk about it. Fentanyl has found its way into every drug, just about. Not so much in marijuana, but in almost every drug, they're substituting a very cheap alternative to what makes the drug potent. And it's very addictive, and we're seeing a lot of that activity. But we're getting more and more reports of paraphernalia on playgrounds. We're getting more and more reports of parks that are seeing drug activity. And so it's concerning. And given the amount of time that officers are spending on calls, which, by the way, is in many cases double what it used to be because of some of the reporting requirements that have been put on us by the state legislature, we're really squeezed for time to get out to some of these places and intercept some of this drug activity that we're seeing. But the assaults are captured differently. This is really anything that's a drug activity that has a nexus to drugs. It could be an assault, but it's really a nexus to drugs.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Any other questions for the chief? Okay, Chief, thanks so much for a great report on this.
Thank you.
And let's see, I'll go back to Mr. Goff. Did that conclude your staff report?
Just a couple real quick things. I think you all heard that Jeffco Health issued an order last week to rescind the mask requirement for indoor public settings. That will expire on February 18th. I believe they're going to meet on February 15th and discuss if they'll pull that order sooner. So, and you may have seen and heard also that Dr. Comstock, the executive director of Jeffco Health, did resign today. So there'll be some changes there. And we are meeting with Jeffco Health over the next 4 weeks to discuss moving forward and living with COVID, kind of transitioning out of the pandemic and into the, what do they call it? The endemic, basically living with COVID. So we're going to be meeting in the next 4 weeks to discuss what that may look like. And good news, the mayor mentioned a couple weeks ago at a council meeting, I believe, we met with CDOT and Perlmutter and Senator Bennett. We're getting some new bridges, I-70 bridges throughout Wheat Ridge. The one over 32nd Avenue, they're going to be starting that construction mid-February. So then I think the one over Harlan goes out to bid in a few weeks, and then we'll have the one over Ward and the one over 44th, which will come next. So quite a bit of investment in the infrastructure in Wheat Ridge. So that's it, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We will go to elected officials reports. Any of our elected officials? Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick announcement that Councilmember Dozeman and I are hosting a town hall community conversation on February 16th at 6 p.m. and that'll be all virtual. I've posted it to my Facebook. It's also on the website, on the city's website. So please join us in District 4. We've got a lot to talk about. And if you have any questions, send either Councilmember Dozeman or myself an email. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional reports, Councilmember Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This last Saturday, Councilmember Ohm and I hosted the annual District 2 Gathers, and we were able to record that, and that has been posted on the city's YouTube channel, as well as I think you can find it on the council page. So we encourage anybody who is District 2 curious about the highlights from 2021 and what's exciting right now and moving forward. And we also gave out the annual District 2 Good Neighbor Awards, which is always an honor to recognize District 2 businesses and neighbors who just go out of their way to make the city a great place to live, work, play, and learn. So a couple of other just quick things, just a reminder, the mask ordinance is being lifted, but we are still meeting virtually through the end of this month. At this point, don't expect any reasons why we wouldn't be coming back as we agreed at the beginning of March. So looking forward to getting back in the room with you guys. And then I thought I'd just mention, Patrick Goff said that CDOT's going to be replacing the bridge over Harlan at I-70. And as part of that project, they actually are going to be replacing all the wood fencing that kind of goes through District 2. There's some really poor condition wood fencing that is, it's there falling down in places, and that's actually going to be replaced with concrete barriers. So that will improve both the aesthetics of I-70, but also, sort of the quality of sound barrier, and a little improvement for District 2 residents that back up to I-70 along there. So looking forward to seeing all those investments coming into our city. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Hulteen. Additional elected officials reports. Councilmember Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real quickly, Ms. Weaver and I have our District 3 meeting on the 19th, Saturday the 19th. It's at 9 a.m. And we have that set up for in-person at the rec center at the moment. So provided nothing changes, we will hopefully see a lot of our District 3 neighbors at the rec center on the 19th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who will be the next in line? Ms. Dozeman.
Oh, I was still muted. Sorry. I wanted to thank We Urge Police Department for the presentation and for coming to speak with us this evening. I really appreciate everything that you do in the community, especially the relationship-based work. You do a phenomenal job, and we really appreciate it. I also wanted to thank Parks and Rec. They came to the Carnation Festival board meeting today. They are always wonderful partners for the festival, and so we are very grateful for them as well, and all of their support. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Some more reports. Our clerk, Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. You will be receiving soon, if you have not, a report on which board and commission seats are available, open in which districts. As you know, the deadline for applications for the annual reappointment or appointment of new members is later this week. It's at the end of the week. And we expect to have information out to you with the packet for the meeting on the 28th, Monday the 28th, by the 18th, when the packets are due to start getting put together. So if you see vacancies in your district, it's not too late to recruit people. The Friday deadline is something that we put out there just to give people a stake in the calendar. There's no law that says they can apply after that. But if they don't apply before the 18th, it'll be difficult to get that information in the packet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Additional matters? Looks like we're almost to wrap up. I have one this Saturday, February 12th at 9 a.m. We'll have a coffee with the mayor. That'll be a Zoom meeting right here on the squares, and you can get the link on that meeting at the city's website. So I hope if you have an opportunity, you'll join us for some conversation. Is there anything more that should come before our meeting tonight? I'll mention that our next meeting, unless I'm in error, will be a week from tonight on February 14th, and we will have a regular city council meeting that will be held virtually, and we hope that you all can attend. Anything else before I adjourn our meeting tonight? Thank you all for joining me. Thanks for our presenters, to the police department and the officers. Did a fine job, and we appreciate the work that you do and coming to tell us about it. So thank you so much. And with that, we will adjourn. Good night, all.